Hello, I'm Santier, and welcome to the Mesmer part of my Guild Wars 1 skill review project series thing. So just some initial stuff. First of all, I'm going to be breaking up the Mesmer videos into multiple parts. Specifically, I'm going to have this introduction, then I'm going to do one for each of the attributes, and then another video for the no attribute and PvE only skills. I just wanted to make things a lot more approachable since the Elementalist video was aggressively long. Okay, with some of that business out of the way, let's go ahead and go over the Mesmer. Now, the Mesmer is a spellcaster, and as such has some of the default things about a spellcaster. So the armor is going to be 60 for the base armor value. No particular special benefits that way. And plus 5 armor on the chest piece and the gloves, and plus 1 energy regeneration on the pants and feet. Now, and of course they also use focuses, staves, and scepters. And these are going to be according to their attributes. We will go over these guys in more detail in just a moment. So let's first talk a little bit thematically about what the Mesmer is. From a gameplay perspective, the Mesmer is very similar to the color blue in Magic the Gathering. They are tricky and have a lot of craftiness about them. There's also some other elements. So in general, Mesmer skills are going to be specializing in a couple of different things. Health degeneration hexes, like hexes in general, are a big thing that Mesmer uses. And a lot of Mesmer damage is armor ignoring. They have a lot of skills that manipulate energy. And they have a lot of interrupts, as well as things that can increase the cooldown of skills and things like that. They also have a number of stances, so again, it's important to remember that you can only have one stance at a time. Whenever you activate a new stance, it will replace the old one. Okay, so let's talk about interrupts a little bit for a moment here. So when a skill is interrupted, which can happen in a number of ways, either something explicitly says it interrupts an action or skill or whatever. Sometimes things are specific categories. You'll see that here with the Mesmer. But when a skill is interrupted, which can also happen with a knockdown or the skill becoming disabled. If it's not through the skill becoming disabled, typically what will happen is the skill's cooldown will, like, all of the costs for the skill are paid, and then the cooldown begins. So if I'm casting, say, Empathy here, you can see it has a 10-second recharge. If it gets interrupted in the middle of its casting, then it will go on recharge. It just won't do its effect. So you have to wait for it to fully recharge if it's interrupted. So that's an important thing to remember about interrupts. If a skill is disabled for an additional period of time, that's added on to the thing here, to the recharge. So a really good example of that, a skill we'll talk about later, is Diversion, which says the next time a foe uses a skill, it takes an additional period of time to recharge. So there are things like that. Something like Complicate right here. It disables it for the target foe and all foes in the area for an additional 11 seconds. That will, if they were in the middle of casting it, that skill cause it to be interrupted because it gets disabled. Blackout will interrupt skills because they are all disabled and you cannot cast a skill that's on recharge, which is what disabling a skill does. So there's a number of things that way. In terms of all of the professions, Mesmer is one of the strongest ones. It's not unlike how blue, if you look at sort of the aggregate history of it in Magic the Gathering, is easily the strongest color. Just because it got so many very powerful things kind of early on. That's why blue's really powerful. The reason why Mesmer is really powerful is because it has a lot of extremely potent utility combined with armor-ignoring damage. Now, I talked about with the Elementalist how important it is to ignore armor. And just for reference, if you look at something like a Destroyer, which is a very late-game enemy, even when they are weak against something, they have 100 armor in that, from an elemental standpoint. So they're already taking half damage, even against cold that they're weak against, because they have like 103 armor against it, and 120 or 140 against other types of armor, or against other types of damage. So the fact that that Mesmer damage, such as energy burn, does not care about armor means that Mesmer damage is always consistent, it's always reliable. And so you're going to lean on sources of armor ignoring damage, especially later in the game, just because armor respecting damage gets so cut out by the huge amount of armor that late game enemies have. This is just an unfortunate property of how ArenaNet designed the game. If they wanted to balance things better, I think that they could have focused more on larger HP pools and less armor, and have things that are like destroyers maybe have like 30 armor against cold instead of 103. So that something like that would have better balanced out the effectiveness of elementalists, would have made them really good at damage. But in the land that we live in, something like Energy Surge is the premier damage spell in the game. So we will talk about some of those skills in the next video. Let's just go ahead and give a quick overview of what each of these attributes is about. Fast casting is the primary attribute, but it's also the one that comes first in this list because they usually do that. So Mesmers also have a Signet sub-theme that I should mention. You're going to see that reflected here in fast casting. So fast casting reads, it decreases the activation time of your spells and signets. It does not affect non-Mesmer skills that have an activation time less than 2 seconds. So if it has an activation time of 2 seconds, it's not a Mesmer skill, then fast casting will speed it up if it is a spell or a signet. It won't affect like chance and shouts and stuff like that. In PvE, for each rank of fast casting, it decreases the recharge time for your Mesmer spells by 3%. So with 12 fast casting, you're getting about a third of the recharge time knocked off. That's going to take something like Energy Surge from 15-second recharge to 10-second recharge. This is ridiculous. So there's a couple of these factors that contribute to the Mesmer being extraordinarily strong in PvE. One of them is fast casting is nutso. Increasing the recharge of all of your Mesmer spells by 3% for each rank is really strong. Mesmer didn't really need that much. I don't remember how things were before some of that stuff, but Mesmer is already very strong, and I don't know why they gave it this particular benefit. I do know why they made... so for a long time, fast casting just affected everything, or all spells and signets. It didn't have the non-Mesmer skills with an activation time less than 2 seconds not affect clause. They added that for some stuff with like elementalist things, for something in PvP. So yeah, that's what that's all about. So one of the side effects of the way fast casting works by increasing spell cast times is a lot of Mesmer spells have kind of lengthy cast times. If you look here, you're going to see a lot of 2s. There's some 1s for sure, and a lot of quarter seconds on interrupts, because interrupts need to be able to happen very quickly to be able to get off. But something like Mistrust has 2-second cast time. Shame has 2-second cast time. A lot of these have 2-second cast times, sometimes even 3. And that's because the Mesmer can speed up those cast times. So what this really does is it means that Mesmer spells tend to be a little slow to cast for non-Mesmers, so they become a lot less interesting when you are a Mesmer secondary. So that's some of the stuff about fast casting. Another quick aside before I launch into this: Mesmer has the second most number of PvP only skills. So Ritualist actually has the most, interestingly enough. Warrior has a very low number. I can release a list somewhere if people are interested. But the significant thing about this is most of the Mesmer stuff are making the PvE versions of those skills stronger. In other words, they weaken the PvP versions. So that's something else that you'll see that contributes to Mesmer power, is just they have a lot of skills that are very powerful and have nerf versions for PvP because they are so strong, sort of thing. So there's a lot more discrepancy between Mesmer in PvE and PvP. So anyway, fast casting makes Mesmers real good and makes Mesmer spells significantly less appealing on Mesmer secondaries. Illusion magic is predominantly focused on some health degeneration hexes and on anti-attacking. So it specifically has a bunch of skills. Like if I'm an illusion Mesmer, usually what I think of when somebody says that, I usually think that that means that they are doing something that's going to cause a lot of anti-attack stuff. The premier spell, there's a couple of premier spells on that. We'll talk about that more when we talk about illusion magic. But something like clumsiness and ineptitude that are anti-attacking hexes. There's a lot of stuff in there about that. Domination magic tends to have the strongest interrupts, like it has the most suite of interrupts, and has a bunch of punishment hexes. So hexes that specifically trigger an effect when an opponent does something and it damages them for that. A good example of that is something like empathy that we'll talk about later. Inspiration magic tends to have a lot of support type stuff. There's going to be a lot of hex and enchantment removal here, but a lot of this has to do with energy management, regaining energy, things like that. So you're going to see a lot of the sort of ways of restoring your energy or managing your energy be primarily in inspiration magic. It's not uncommon to see someone go into inspiration magic as a secondary mesmer in order to make use of that energy management. So that's something to be aware of. In general, energy management is kind of important on Mesmer. You're going to see it's very rare for professions outside of Elementalist to have a 25 energy cost skill. Skill energy costs come in 0, 1, 5, 10, 15, and 25. And so what you're going to see is Mesmer has a lot of 10s and some 15s, but those are just like the straight 10s and 15s and stuff. So Mesmer energy can go pretty quickly. They don't, like, you have to specifically bring energy management as you do with everything. And so that's just a factor. So inspiration magic might be a good thing to go into there, or bringing a necromancer for energy management support. What's called a battery. We'll talk about that more when we talk about blood magic in the necromancer videos. But anyway, that's kind of an overview of a lot of stuff here with the Mesmer. I definitely think that the Mesmer is it's arguably one of the strongest professions in the game, and it has a lot of reasons why. Armor ignoring damage, fast casting being extremely powerful as a primary attribute, a lot of powerful disruption abilities that make it so that way enemies can't hurt you, because there's two ways of not dying in this game. One of them is healing, and the other is preventing damage. So Mesmers are really good at preventing damage by stopping enemies from doing things that hurt you. And so that's one of their great strengths. Anyway, that's going to go ahead and wrap things up for this introduction. We're going to start into things next time with, I believe, domination magic. So until then, everyone, take care. Bye-bye.